welcome everyone to this seminar today. It's my great pleasure and honor to introduce our speaker, uh, Dr. Undraa whom I've known for over 10 years, and I'm afraid I stumble on your name. I apologize. It's Agvaanluvsan, who was a science fellow here between 2008 and 2010. And since being a science fellow here at CSAC, she returned, after that, she returned to her native Mongolia, where she became the Deputy Director of the Mongolian Institute of Strategic Studies, Ambassador at Large in charge of nuclear security issues at the Mongolian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, a Member of Parliament, and Chair of the Parliamentary Subcommittee on Sustainable Development Goals. She is by training a physicist and worked at Livermore for a period of 3 years, I think. And so it's wonderful to have her back and to talk about this important topic on the comparative analysis of energy and resource policy issues among Mongolia, Kazakhstan, and Kyrgyzstan in light of Russian and Chinese policies. So, Undraa, it's a great to have you back here to speak to us.
Thank you. Thank you, David. First of all, I'd like to thank all my colleagues here at CSAC and co-directors Scott Sagan and Radwin for having me back. And it's a pleasure to be back at Stanford. Today, I wish to share with you some analysis and perspectives I have regarding Mongolia, Kyrgyzstan, and Kazakhstan. I compare and contrast policies of these three countries and attempt to consider the current situation. I'll share my interpretation in energy and resource policy in general and look at some energy minerals projects in particular to make a case in point. During my time in Parliament, I started the responsible mining lobby group, support group within the Parliament. It was not there before. And Mongolia is a heavily mining country. Our economy is almost 100% dependent on mineral sector. So if we are going to reuse the Earth's resources, we better do it in a responsible way. So that was the logic behind starting that effort, and I still believe so. Today, I wish to talk about energy minerals. In particular, I want to look at uranium and coal deposits, and maybe I will allude to other minerals, but I think at some other point, critical minerals will be very interesting, especially in this turbulent time globally for our future combined effort for decarbonization, high technology, electrification of vehicles, etc. So that issue should be addressed in light of geopolitics as well. So let me start my talk with an overview of the three countries. Some of you may be familiar with one or the other, but I wanted to compare and contrast the three. Mongolia is a country with 3.5 million people. It's in East Asia. It borders with only two countries, China and Russia. Kyrgyzstan is twice the size in terms of population, but in terms of land area, it's maybe like 7 times smaller than Mongolia. And it is bordering with Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and China. Kazakhstan is approximately three times the size of Kyrgyzstan in terms of population, and land area is about twice that of Mongolia. It is bordering with both Russia and China, like Mongolia, but it also borders with other states in Central Asia, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, and Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, sorry. So let me go into comparing some basic data in addition to geography. GDP per capita for Mongolia is about approximately 4,000. For Kyrgyzstan, it's a third of that, And for Kazakhstan, is the most developed of the three. It's 9,600. Corruption perception index is very interesting and useful index to look at the way of governance. It's a perception, but of course it shows the actual reality of corruption. In Mongolia, we are 110, I believe it's out of 190 countries that are ranked. Kyrgyzstan is worst off, it's 144th place, and Kazakhstan is 102, second place, 102nd place. And World Economic Forum Gender Gap Index puts Mongolia in the place 65, Kyrgyzstan 86 and 70. And not just these three countries, but the other countries, when you look at it, corruption perception is somewhat correlated with the gender equality. So one could look into the strength of the correlation. I thought also the Information Communication Technology Development Index shows the level of education and competitiveness of the country. It also is consistent with the development that Kazakhstan is better off than the other two. It's in the place 52, and Mongolia is 91, and Kyrgyz is 109. Religion, Mongolia is more than half the population are Buddhists, and we have a lot of people who are non-religious. In Kyrgyz, it's 90% Islamic, and Kazakhstan is 69%. So that's another main difference, the religious preferences of the population. Schools data shows also the influence of the neighboring countries in the education sector, therefore culture and everything. So there are 7 schools in Mongolia that are instructions are in Russian out of 849, and in Kyrgyzstan there are more than 200 Russian language schools, which is 17% of the total. In Kazakhstan, number of Russian language schools is somewhat decreasing, but there are more than 1,000 schools. So even though Mongolia was under the strong influence of Soviet Union up until 1990, we were not really officially part of it, whereas Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan both gained the independence of the Soviet Union in 1990 and 1991, respectively. Also, the Russian language teaching in Kazakhstan is going down. It used to be 43% in 2000, and in 2016 it's 34%. In latest statistics, it's even less than 30% now. But strangely, also in Kyrgyzstan, even the number of schools in terms of percentage, Russian language schools are not that big. The higher education is predominantly taught in Russian. Okay, so I would like to maybe oversimplify the energy policy of the two great powers in the region, just to make the points and to see how it interplays with the domestic policies. I term Russian energy policy as export-based, and of course there are lots of nuances if you look in detail. Chinese energy policy, I would say import-based, but a lot of energy resources in China comes domestically. So besides being former communist countries with some format of the nomadic heritage, how do these three countries interact with the powers in the neighborhood? And so we will see how these export-import policies impact the countries. So you read in the news that there was a summit meeting of Eurasian Economic Union at which Russia asserted that it would like to start a common market for energy products. So in October, Russian Prime Minister Mikhail Mishustin stated that the formation of common markets for gas, oil, and petroleum products as well as electric power industry, remain the most important issues for all the member states of the Eurasian Economic Union. And two of the states under consideration of my today's talk as part of the Union. Uh, on Friday, just last week, Vladimir Putin, President of Russia, stated that we must implement this common market within the next 2 years. We must formulate the principles of this work and come to practical realization from common market for electric energy. So it's interesting, oil and gas is attributed to electric energy production. I would like to specifically pick one aspect of Chinese policy. Each policy by itself would be independent talks, books we can write. This aspect of this wide range of policies that impacting the three countries under discussion is the Chinese domestic development policy. At the 20th National Congress of the Chinese People's Party, there were four inequalities or gaps that was emphasized. So gaps in regional development, so north versus south. For example, southern 5 states are more developed than all the other states combined in terms of economic activities. Gaps in urban versus rural. It's true for all the states. The cities are better developed than the rural areas. There is also a difference in profits in various sectors. So banking, telecommunication, agriculture, there's a significant amount of difference in profits. So in order to increase the economic redistribution on equality policy, there is a concerted effort for that. And the fourth inequality the government or the party is addressing is reducing the welfare and income of the citizens that live in the city and urban areas. So the outcome of this policy has been going on, but it now is the main focus. So that means in the northern China, there will be more infrastructure, urban development, and so on, which will put an added demand for the raw materials for the neighboring countries to be imported to China. The Chinese energy, of course, China declared on the climate summits and so on to be net zero by 2060, but the demand for hydrocarbon is still going to be high for the next couple of years, decades. So China is obviously the largest user of coal still, and majority of coal is mined in China domestically. It's 4.1 billion metric tons in 2021. And in addition, China imports significant amount of coal from Australia, Indonesia, Russia, and Mongolia. So we'll get to details in Mongolia, and oil and gas sector and nuclear. So diversification for energy is very important. I haven't included issues such as hydrogen production and hydrogen fuel. So transportation fleet update and electrification is, of course, very interesting topic, and I think Chinese are making rapid progress on that. Dynamics surrounding gas and nuclear is somewhat, it's now very hesitating to put it under hydrocarbon, for example, gas, whereas the European Union passed the legislation last year classifying gas and nuclear as a green energy, and there is low cost financing available for these types of energies. So probably it will come into fruition in other countries as well. So Kazakhstan. Let's look into the domestic policies of the three countries. For Kazakhstan, one word that could describe Kazakhstan's energy policy seems to be diversification. Kazakhstan is a net exporter of energy products. It produced 91.9 million tons of crude oil in 2018 because of the Kashagan field, which is the 5th largest reserve in the world. There is also a lot of progress in Kazakhstan's gas network development. So Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, China gas pipeline was completed in 2016, and it increased the gas transit volume from that region to China from 30 billion cubic meters per year to 55 BCM per year. And there are other lines being considered. So nuclear issue, of course, it's a dual use technology. When we look into nuclear energy, we of course have to look into the non-proliferation risks associated with it. Kazakhstan is not a newcomer to that. It has a very long nuclear history. And Semipalatinsk site, for instance, was the site of 450 nuclear tests out of more than 700 tests. The people of Kazakhstan endured the hardship for more than 40 years. Recently, Dr. Kasinova, presented here, wrote an excellent book called Atomic Step and How Kazakhstan Gave Up the Bomb, described that history very well. Kazakhstan has been also a major nuclear weapon country. So there was in the recent article in the Foreign Service Journal, our own FSI, Rosa Gotemelu put it, Ukraine, Kazakhstan, and Belarus became non-proliferation treaty, non-nuclear weapon states since they agreed to give up the nuclear weapon in their territory. In terms of warheads for strategic delivery vehicles, missiles, and bombers combined, there were 1,900 in Ukraine, 1,410 in Kazakhstan, and 100 in Belarus. So more than 1,000 nuclear warheads in Kazakhstan. If they had kept the bomb, they would be major nuclear weapon state currently, but they made the brave decision to choose to be non-nuclear weapon state. So this is a very mixed story of during the Soviet era. Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, also Mongolia supplied a lot of nuclear materials, uranium, especially, and the way it was done was quite polluting, and the consequences, people are still enduring the pain of cleaning that up and reclamation efforts. So environmental damage and social damage and psychological damage is still there. Remarkable about Kazakhstan is their transition to civilian use of nuclear power. They are now #1 uranium producer in the world. And in the picture, we see nuclear fuel being shipped to China just, I believe, last month. So Kazatomprom is now the world's largest producer of natural uranium. And they shipped this is a picture, part of a picture of a load of about 30 metric tons of uranium, enriched uranium fuel loaded to the Chinese nuclear reactors. So it's low enriched uranium for Chinese General Nuclear Power Corporation. So for Kyrgyzstan, unlike Kazakhstan, the energy and mineral sector can be termed as nationalism. One word. I'm trying to simplify so that you remember the differences. Legacy uranium sites are reclaimed in Kyrgyzstan. Kyrgyzstan was also major supplier of raw uranium to Soviet Union during the Cold War. And after the independence in 1991, some multilateral organizations like European Bank of Reconstruction and Development are supporting reclamation efforts in Kyrgyzstan. And they have declared that they will not do uranium mining developments. And so in that sense, they're remaining committed to not engaging anything nuclear related. So in Kyrgyzstan, the mineral sector, I think there is new pipeline being built, new railway construction being built. But if I don't mention about the gold mine that's nationalized, it will be a miss because it's like an elephant in the room for Kyrgyz. It is by far the largest project in the country, and they have been, the government seized it, and as the president Sadir Japarov said early this year, the Khuldar gold mine has been completely and irrevocably returned to our motherland, and this nationalization of the mine was his main ticket for presidency, winning the election. So, for the sake of time, I'll just maybe quickly skip the main points of this survey is to see where Kyrgyz and Kazakh were strongly agreeing to be aligned with Russia, or if there was any concern of trading with China. So both countries seem to believe that the relationship with China will harm the relationship with Russia, economic relationship, whereas for Uzbekistan, it reverses true. So that brings to Mongolia. Is the horse race. It's like very important for the Mongolian culture. The horses are, and at the race when the horse goes to the start line and just turn, is like very symbolic, and it's very very important for the culture. So I chose the picture for the cultural significance of it, and for Mongolia. Uh, the majority of the minerals sector is now focusing on copper and gold. And some of the uranium sector development, the key legacy is in the eastern Mongolia, where in the Dornot province, there was an underground uranium mine. It's more than 500 meters deep. So it's quite sophisticated in terms of mining excavation technology. And there was a dedicated line from Dornot to Russia's Perergunsky for the enrichment of the, not, sorry, it was the conversion facility in Perergunsky, I believe. So it was uranium turned to uranium hexafluoride, which presumably had been enriched in places like Angars. So there are people who know the technical details very well. The point is that it was all designed so that specific projects will feed to other industrial complexes, so it will work together in unison. So at the fall of Soviet Union, the mining site was transferred to Mongolia, but the Canadian mining companies that were doing exploration there, one of them, the license had been cancelled, and there was a legal repercussion from that mine. So Mongolian mining sector, I think, is now has a big black mark, I would say, on how we are dealing with the uranium resources development. And when I was ambassador in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs with the colleagues from here, we were developing how Mongolia could engage in the nuclear fuel sector, fuel cycle. So various countries could have expressed interest in partnering with Mongolia. And in 2011, after the Fukushima incident or the tsunami, some of the discussions were sidelined, but there seemed to be more interest globally in the nuclear energy, of course, because of the climate efforts. So here's another picture from Yakutia, the power of Siberia. Let's move to Far East somewhat. So power of Siberia is the name of a pipeline, but in addition to that, Siberia is really powerful. Besides the pipeline, I think in terms of forestry, in terms of natural resources, other than oil and gas. Like for example, the major supplier of titanium currently is from that region. Russia's #1 supplier in diamond region is in far north, etc. So it's very important for the Russian economy and global economy, and it's also very important for the global climate. And you may remember the ongoing fire in Siberia that it took place every last 5 years. Every year there was a fire, and the size of fire was in some ways like bigger than some countries. So it was very, very difficult to put it off, and the effect was felt all throughout Asia. So it's really the lung of the earth, I would say. So the power of Siberia pipeline runs 3,000 kilometers in Russia's Far East, and in China there is a new section being built, and it just came into operation at the border city of Heihe, I think is how it's said, and it reaches to Shanghai. And recently there was a discussion at the Shanghai Security Cooperation, as well as in Samarkand, as well as in China during Mongolian president's visit, the discussion to build a new pipeline that passes through Mongolia. So the new pipeline that carries gas from Siberia to China that passes through Mongolia would enable a Power of Siberia 2 pipeline, which would be another 50 billion cubic meter of gas annually to the Chinese market. So it's going to be very important for Russian economy, but there is a certain amount of local opposition to that in Mongolia, and Mongolia is much more vibrant in terms of democracy, I would say. So we will see if the public would strongly oppose. So let me spend the last few minutes on about the ongoing protests in Mongolia. In the beginning of my talk, I mentioned Mongolia is a key supplier of coal to China. And Mongolian coal is important to China, but it is more important for Mongolia because of the economic reasons. It is one of the top 2 export products, and it really is a key driver for the economy. And recently, there have been allegations and cases and revealing of whistleblowing of anti-corruption corruption that took place with coal. So how it is done, as I understand it, there's a 2 set of contracts, one with a lower price that is shown to customs and tax authorities and so on, and the contract that's hidden with a higher price is settled outside the country. So in that way, the decision makers, some ministers and members of parliament and CEOs of a state-owned company, they have embezzled approximately $12.5 billion, which is same as our GDP. So you can understand why public is so upset. This is a picture of young mothers with their little children, and they are demanding the coal thieves to be brought to justice. And if you understand it's like minus 30 centigrade there, you can understand like what it takes for people to come out and protest in that cold. This is nomadic herders who came to the city. They're also angry, and the fuel diesel supply is like intermittent. So the economic activities with the city and with the rural areas really suffering because of that. The protest is continuing since December 4th, and it took a more organized form since they broke into the parliament building. You see behind like a big Genghis Khan monument is a parliament building, and the protesters broke into the building. They broke glasses, and there was a Christmas tree that was put on the main square by the UN office in Mongolia that was burned down. So fear was that maybe it would lead to some violence, but it seems like now the protests are more less violent, but more organized and clear communication. It's a very difficult time for Mongolia, but I remain optimistic that the democracy and participation of the public would result to more transparency and better accountability of the government and the fight against corruption. If it wins, we will be all better off. Thank you for your attention.
Yes, thank you very much. Do you want to come in and sit here or stay there? We'll open it up to questions, but let me say that for people who are taking part by Zoom, if you want to send a question, just send it to the Q&A function, and we'll try to accommodate those questions along with the others. So, right, let me open it up to questions. We usually provide an opportunity for our fellows first. Any questions? Let me start with a question. You mentioned that in Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan, a rather ambiguous attitude to China and Russia, or rather ambiguous attitude on whether it was good to have a united um, um, energy market within the economic union. And Mongolia, of course, is in a different situation, but it must be watching also what's going on in Central Asia. Does Mongolia have a position on this?
It is, of course, there is some um, policy considerations or scholarly activities watching the countries that are in the region. Um, it's up to the countries themselves, of course, to decide on how they would develop the resources, where they would do the import and build an economic relationship. It seems to me that the Eurasian Economic Union is really reminiscent of the Soviet Union arrangement, whereas the main decision is usually made in Russia, and then it's like bilateral relationships. In one arm always is Russia, the other countries take like it's two-sided. It's not multilateral. Mongolian policymakers are aware of, for example, the diversification that Kazakhstan has succeeded, and I think in the democracy, the primary goal for most politicians seem to be to win the election. So a lot of populist promises are made to the public. If the public is answering to a more nationalistic approach, then the politicians just seem to be leaning toward that. So even though there is a recognition for successes or the shortcomings of different countries in the Eurasian Union, the learning is not there. So more actual outcome is the answer to whatever election outcome the politicians wish to achieve.
Yeah. Harold.
Thanks, I wanted to follow up on David's question to ask about if you could talk a little bit more about what you see as the Russian logic for the common market. Is it to reduce competition with Russian gas exports, coordinate prices, create a cartel? Does it have maybe a more geopolitical objective? If you could just talk to sort of the Russian perspective on this, that'd be interesting. Thank you.
So it's been like for most of us challenging to know the reliable source of information. So in order to analyze the situation, looking at the variety of sources, television in Mongolia, actual state visits, bilateral consultations, how the result is different from what's being discussed in the media, and it seems to me my analysis is that the main goal for the government policy, the objective of the government is to exert the influence, to keep the influence they already have from before and building now in the region. Of course, it also is a very good question. um, Currently, of course, as you saw from the protests, coal is like now everybody became aware of the coal mining process, export and shipping, and now the number of coal trucks at the border and that pass daily is now in the news. Like we watch, oh, today is that centigrade and dollar exchange rate. Another statistics that everybody is aware of is the number of trucks. And it's kind of ironic for me that we all as a country have to be watching how many trucks have we passed in the border today. So this is, I hope, will change. The activities that in the economy taking place that probably will change that is the copper production. The major project in Mongolia is with Rio Tinto company. It's a world-class copper and gold operation in Gobi, and there's an unprecedented, complicated but very deep underground mine for coal, which is likely to come into operation in 2023, and that would definitely boost the economy. The other activities that um, government as well as the private sector is engaging is cashmere production, exporting of cashmere fiber products. But I think for the foreseeable future, we will rely on coal.
For each of the for each of the three countries, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Mongolia, could you describe uh, who is doing or running the mining projects? You mentioned Rio Tinto for gold and maybe coal, but but who develops the properties, operates them?
Uh, for the mining sector, the last 5 or 6 years that I have been closely working with the minerals sector policy, investment, large events, and so on, the interest and investment level to Kazakhstan have only diversified further and further. Kazakhstan's oil and gas sector, as well as other minerals, especially uranium and rare earth, the investors have been from all over the place. The key investors who have a long-standing experience, like the French, Areva now, Arano, and the Chinese, the Russians also have been taking part in development of resources. For the gold industry in Mongolia, we have Rio Tinto, but for the coal, at some point we had Peabody, Anglo-American, who grew tired of the uncertainty with policy changing and public opposition, environmental concerns, and so some of it is legitimate concern, some of it is, I would say, foreign actors pretending to be nomads who are opposing, and the nomads themselves, for example, are used as a face to oppose the project. So the investors who are interested from variety of countries are have exit depending on the type of mineral. For the uranium, Mongolia still is partnering with Orano in one of the major projects in southern Mongolia, and with the CNNC in this legacy mine project in eastern Mongolia. Uzbekistan seemed to be embarking on nationalistic route when it comes to Western investors. The Kumtar gold mine was run by Centera Gold, who used to be held by Cameco at some point, and now they have exited the country. And the remaining mining projects are investors mostly from Russia, China, and maybe some from Kazakhstan.
Yes.
Thanks so much for your talk. I'm Jim. I'm visiting fellow here. I want to come back to that common market idea, energy market, the common energy market. You had the quotes from the Russian president, prime minister. And just, I had two questions about that. One was, sort of what would the expected next step be following from that announcement, and also is there variation in reaction toward the idea? I mean, like who's the most supportive outside of Russia for that, and who would be the biggest opponents to such an idea? Thanks.
The common energy market idea had been around for a while, but the actual statements at the highest level have been only very recently. So the consequences and manifestation of the policy, probably it will take a while before it materializes. It is perhaps no surprise to us look into other countries that are trying to engage in economic activities with the common market should it be built. For example, Iran have readied the free trade agreement with all the member states of the Eurasian Economic Union, and with the UN sanctions, the countries, it probably is providing a leeway or a bypass for specific countries to engage with the market. The steps, my guess is like a wild guess, is the market will be flourishing with the countries that show more interest, not necessarily just the energy sector, but labor exchange, for example. Kyrgyzstan, out of 7 million people, they have nearly 1 million individuals working in Russia and remitting funds to back home. So there's articles that are saying it's very difficult to find jobs in Russia. So what would those people do? They'll go back to Kyrgyz. There is not enough job, but there are lots of also Russians who are coming to the neighboring countries. Some of them are avoiding draft, and some are looking for jobs. There is no job back home. So that type of people-to-people exchange seems to be growing. Same also is true for the companies that are exiting Russia. Some of the countries in the Union are engaging in a policy of welcoming investors to set up their factories or facilities in the countries, and then they produce materials, goods, services, and they send it back to Russia, sell there. So this type of economic activity will probably increase. Cartelling, I think, has much less of a probability than the diversification and the activities, just in general, the flow of currencies. Some specific members of the union are engaging in monetary policy to reduce their reliance on ruble, for example, which is impacting their foreign currency reserve, and they're putting an upper limit of the number of amount of dollar an individual can exchange and take out of country or transfer out of the country. So these type of monetary policies will probably slow down any success the economy union would hope to have.
Hey, thanks for the talk. Ian Reynolds here at CSAC. You mentioned the corruption dynamics in Mongolia. I was wondering if there were kind of similar phenomenon going on in the other two countries regarding corruption, political backlash, or kind of scandals that might be causing protests or implications for future protests. Thanks.
The corruption is really a very, very difficult issue in Mongolia. And it is one of the reasons why I just was fed up with politics, to be frank. I'm a scientist by training, so as an academic background person, to be in a backdoor dealings environment where there was too much to bear. But I was also a minority, unfortunately. If there were more individuals voicing it's not the right thing to do, probably we will fight it from the inside, let's say. But also the corruption is not just the large-scale corruption. I was the director of an organization that does the polling and survey, and one of the corruption study found that people perceive there is significant amount of corruption in education sector and healthcare sector. And how does it happen? There's not enough schools or kindergarten to go around it. So people bribe the school principal, but not to have their kids to enter the school. Same is true for the healthcare services. It is really unfortunate that it permeated so deep into the society. And the danger with that type of settling of corruption is the normalization of it. People think it's the way of life and nobody choose to fight. So this type of protest, mass protest that's enduring, even if it is cold weather, is a good news in that sense. So it has to start somewhere. Uh, if- when we look at specific cases in Kazakhstan, for example, you may remember how it was with the Kazakhstan Prom directorship. There was big allegations like Jakishev, I think was the name of the individual. And during that time, of course, the president was a different person, and the close allies and inner circle of a president was known to be very like corrupt practices. How much of that extent is now responded by the public, whether the Kazakh public opposed to that in open sense is very unclear, but it seems like things are going for the better direction in Kazakhstan. In Kyrgyz, there is a, uh, I haven't looked into it, but maybe the resource nationalism and corruption, actual corruption, go hand in hand. And if that's the case, the ways things are developing in Kyrgyzstan probably is indicative of corruption there, but there is no news related to public opposition wishing to change that.
Thank you for the talk. I was curious about China and China's relations with Mongolia. I mean, we know that China has become more aggressive in terms of its relations with the Central Asian countries and, the Belt and Road Initiative. If there's a lot of corruption in Mongolia, that means there's probably some openings for the Chinese in various kinds of ways. Are they putting pressure on Mongolia in any way, or are they seeking to expand their influence in Mongolia? And is that potentially a problem for Mongolia, or is somehow Mongolia safe?
I think for the domestic corruption challenges we face as a society with corruption, first and foremost, we are to look for a solution from ourselves. Who to blame? It's like our own decision, our own making mostly. But there is impact, like you allude to. I think the Chinese authorities, uh, their fight against corruption is real, and seems like they also have their own struggle in terms of identifying who is corrupt and bringing those individuals to justice and try to find effective ways dealing with corruption at all levels: local government, national government, even state-owned enterprises as well. What happened in Mongolia last 30 years, during some of this period, the investments from China seem to have been kind of shady. It was, of course, it takes both sides, right? The investor partnership in business, local partners, as well as the Chinese investors, they probably will engage in activities that are not illegal, they're not legal both in both countries. Uh, in this coal case, Chinese authorities and media have brought it also to light that there is definitely officially strong desire to reduce corruption, eliminate corruption. So in that sense, officially, it's a collaboration to make business more transparent and more fair. Um, the way it's dealt is, of course, different. For example, we don't have like a the corporal punishment, whereas in China, some of the corruption charges like end in execution of the wrongdoing individuals. And so the scope is different, the effect is different, and of course, Chinese of the lawmakers, sorry, uh, the justice system itself is somewhat corrupt too. So there's not a heavy-handed approach. It's a slow progress, but there's relation. Definitely.
The question from one of our Zoom participants. The question is, what is the enriched uranium production status?
So enriched uranium, there is none, but for the uranium exploration, the proven reserve in Mongolia stands at about 62,000 tons. The estimated reserve is about 1.5 million tons, which would make Mongolia one of the most uranium-rich countries. The yellow cake production will probably pioneered by the French investment in southern Mongolia, Orano company, very close to mining, probably this summer. They got the mining permit.
Hi, my name is Julie George. I'm a predoctoral fellow at CSAC. Thanks so much for your presentation about comparative analyses of energy and resource policies among the three countries. I'm wondering if you could speak a bit to these three countries in light of the UN climate change conference that happened last month in Egypt and how the countries have responded. I know with Kyrgyzstan, they've mentioned in speeches about how it needs more international support. And so I'm wondering, what does international support look like for these three countries to fight climate change with energy? Thank you.
Yeah, for the climate change discussion, narrative, dialogue, each country comes with different agenda. The setting a very ambitious goal often falls short, but makes some progress. In Mongolia's case, I think the reliance on coal for the economy is a major difficulty, but we must export coal in order to develop. Whereas same is true for the two countries, Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan, in terms of mining projects, oil projects. You know, it's a practical decision currently, but also commonalities try to build a renewable energy sector, whereas like Kyrgyzstan is already 90% reliant on hydropower. They're already quite clean in terms of energy, domestic energy production. Renewable sector for Mongolia has an upper cap because our national grid is tied to the Siberian grid, and for the grid stabilization, it's difficult to have these intermittent resources too much tied to the system because ours is already kind of difficult to stabilize. And same is not true for Kazakhstan, for example. So their commitment to go to 30% renewable by 2030, I believe, is more likely to be implemented than ours. International support for Kyrgyzstan, I have not looked into exactly what type of support they're seeking. I know for the trade, for example, their trade with Uzbekistan, the border clashes with Uzbekistan, and so on. It's one-sided story, but what do the Uzbeks say, for example? It's their, they have to come to a common solution. And same with China. I think the transport is increasing. Even though, like in this study, you see the people are, respondents, 70% think that, you know, economic ties with China will reduce, would do the harm to their economic collaboration with Russia, and their support for Russia is very strong. So does it mean that the public will let the economic activity flourish at the China border or not? So this is all unclear, but there is commonality and differences.
So you're a big country geographically, but small in population, and your two neighbors are huge, China and Russia. And I'm interested in what is the there is a Mongolian view of what's the ideal Sino-Russian relationship from the Mongolian point of view, and how likely are you to get the kind of relationship between your two neighbors that you would really like?
It's how the lots of scenarios, even just for one, right? Russia. Uh, Now, as a humanity, we are in a difficult situation right now. I think the fantastic aspects of Russia that I grew liking and loving, even like literature, art, culture, the nature. It's very beautiful land. And when you meet specific people, Russian people are very warm people. But look at what the atrocities that are being done in Ukraine, and it's just unbearable to read some of the news and see the videos. So what does it happen? What does it mean for Russia's future? Do the public continue supporting? Do the falsification of the news within Russia? How long it would withhold? The human rights issue, the outright statements of sidelining the minority groups, the recruiting of the minorities to send to the front line in a large proportion, and this is going to breed discontent. And Russia, in my opinion, have been really neglecting the social challenges in its far east. So many of the towns in the Russian eastern part, there is a rampant poverty, substance misuse. The number of population is going down. So huge challenges in the far east, and the public really are eager to see some change in policy. So the future is kind of bleak in that respect. Whereas in China, like I described in my presentation, is the equalizer policy, let's say, reducing the inequalities, gaps, and so on, kind of in a forceful way, is probably gonna have some outcome. Look at how they built up the domestic infrastructure and fast railway line and different way of cleaning the environment. There's definitely, they put the money where their talk is, so it shows. Same is true for human rights issues like Russia. So for better or worse, Mongolia seemed to be better off than the two neighbors in terms of human rights and acceptance of diversity of viewpoints. We have problems, but at least we discuss about it. There's opposition, there's denial, blah blah blah, etc. So it's all over the tabloids too. But I think the human rights issue, specifically acknowledging minority groups, letting different voices be heard in variety of channels, is not there in China. So how long would the country like that go on in terms of individual freedom and liberty? The way the government dealt with the COVID and how there was an outcry across China and major universities who were opposing the zero COVID policy, and there seemed to be some easing, tightening, sort of loosening of the policies for the zero COVID. And I don't want to start on the other neighboring issues in South China Sea and so on. So the future is very much unclear, and my hope is what ideally it would be done in a peaceful manner and a civilized way.
Okay, and that we've absolutely reached our time limit. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for having me.